cancelled would have been.
Okay. So today I'm going to talk about, oh God, did I? I haven't shared my screen as yet, and I put my PowerPoint on. So last week I was talking about landscapes. So today we'll start talking a lot about the Himalayas. Okay. So today I'll be covering the Ramayana. Okay. And next, so even with the syllabus, we'll be here. Sometimes like I've covered a lot of what has been there. So sometimes I'll take over the week. So I'll keep adjusting. Okay.
Yeah.
Because while making the PowerPoints, I was like, okay, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, but also there's so many things mentioned in the Puranas also about the Himalayas and the Vedas that also has to be told to you guys. So anyway,
So this is week 4 actually, right?
What?
This is actually week 4.
Yeah, this is week 4B, and then this week we'll get into week 5.
Right. Yeah, we
But
have one.
because yeah, I remember because I had missed a class one last week, and the whole syllabus will be done. So even if we miss a class, just don't worry about it. We will
No.
finish the entire thing. And yeah, so we do, like I've started with week 5 because we've already done a lot of, we've covered almost everything that I needed to in the last weeks. So D.W. Mining, he wrote this, The Beholding Eye, and he says in the book, any landscape is composed of not only what lies before our eyes, but what lies within our heads. And that's very important because, especially when it comes to the Himalayas, we have been enculturated into understanding so many things about the Himalayas, about the context, especially when we talk about the Ramayana. Hanuman coming and picking up, Sanjeevani, and that whole contextual thing. Though the Mahabharata talks more about the Himalayas than the Ramayana, but we see the Ramayana being played out also. And the question is that why does that happen? Why do epics take that central kind of stage, in certain places? Associated with that. Okay, so we'll talk about all of that today. So Anne Weston Spearn writes in her Language of Landscape that the language of landscape is our native language. Landscape was the original dwelling. Humans evolved among plants and animals under the sky, upon the earth, near water. Everyone carries that legacy in body and mind. Humans touched, saw, heard, smelled, tasted, lived in, and shaped landscapes before the species had words to describe what it did. Landscapes were the first human texts, read before the invention of other signs and symbols. Clouds, wind, and sun were clues to weather. Ripples and eddies, signs of rock and life underwater. Caves and ledges, promises of shelter. Leaves guide to food. Bird calls, warning of predators. So when we look at the rustic kind of landscape, the wild landscape of Himalayas, all these elements kind of bring in the whole experience of it. Yeah. So landscapes in India, and I talked about sacred landscapes in our last sessions. It represents cultural identity, mirrors some kind of social order, inspires built forms, represented in epic texts, medieval manuals on designs, oral legends, local people. And I'll cover all of these. Especially when it talks about identity, we, the Himalayan people, very, very difficult to be an insider. I have lived in the village and I know how tough it is. You may be considered, oh, Sonali is very friendly, this, that, she's one of our own. But when it really comes to nitty-gritties, they are very, very conscious about their identity. People who were ancestors were there, they are Himalayan. Even if you come, in the Kulu Valley, even if you're from Shimla or any other place, you don't get that passage. And it's to the point of, um, it's very evident that you're alienated at a certain level. Okay. When you talk about social order, I feel geographically also how the placement of the villages is, of the settlements is, that the lower order is on the lower part of the hill while the higher are up. Even when it comes to distribution of resources, the government may say, oh, we don't discriminate. But, building roads for Nagar, for example, which is a very popular town, versus Shanalti, which is a low caste occupied village. Okay.
Just a village, just a village. There
It's
is
a
no
village. It's a
tourist
village.
attraction.
Nagar is a town. Shanalti is a village. It is pathetic with the road and all. For 3 years, I've seen a road being built. Terrible state of affairs. The nali, the drain was, overflowing. Nobody was doing anything. So it's also the stepmotherly treatment towards the lower on the social order. Though the constitution may say anything, and they may, just say anything, but when you experience it, when they are barred from entering temples and they can't do anything about it, it must be such a frustrating experience, that they take it, I have to narrate this. There is this temple of Bhaga Siddhi near my house. I went there and there was some puja happening, a lot of people, a lot of kids. This little kid, I saw him beating the drums outside. So I knew instantly that he's from the low caste. Okay, because they cannot enter the temple because of the drum. It has the skin, animal skin. So they're
Okay.
associated with the lower caste. So the next day, I again went to the temple. And this time, this little boy was in the courtyard riding his bicycle. And I have a video of him. I'll post it to you guys. So I said, so what's your name? So he told me his name. So he, I just started talking to him where he was from. He says, I live near, my family takes care of the temple. I said, I saw you standing outside that day with your father. He said, yes, I do like coming inside, but I'm not allowed to. This little child saying that, no, that hurt me so much. Like we as a nation, we haven't really progressed, that a child has to come to terms with the boundaries and where he can and he cannot go. So as a nation, we failed our children,
On many different levels, yes.
different levels. A little boy of 7-8 years old saying that, it's very heart wrenching. And I don't think people understand that. Yeah. So like, and just this says it all of how far we've come. So there are certain conceptual categories of landscape. There's an architectural historian by the name, I'm forgetting her first name, it's Day or something. So she brings about 4 categories, 4 or 5 categories of how we view landscapes in India. Okay, especially in India, the transcendental view of nature is very, very dominant, which is a divine view. Okay, then you have the evolutionary view, where aspects of nature that aid human survival are another category. Then there's a category which is utilitarian, nature as subjugated or exploited. Ecological, where interdependence of humans and nature is seen. Then there's this idealist romantic categorization, where aesthetics and metaphors are based either on rationalism or intuition. So most of these views may coexist, but also they may change and take one may take place of the other due to many changes which may be socio-cultural. But we'll focus on the transcendental view of nature, divine. As I said in our earlier class, that the words bhu, bhubhag, and sthal, sthalam, all of these point to divine, about marking a boundary, not in terms of possession, but in terms of divinity. Yeah. Now, certain evolutionary psychologists, they say that how we choose a place, and how we view the place, it also depends on the optimal conditions in the natural environment that aided survival during evolution, which are encoded in our DNA. It's hardwired. So whenever we are exposed to natural elements like nature, mountains, trees, we have a positive response to it. We feel happier in that kind of environment. Why? Because genetically we are encoded, and we harken this back to our earliest habitat, the savanna. Okay, so the spatial arrangement of how the landscape is laid out It's to see and to hide as well. So that is the primary experience of nature, which agrees with us. So that's why nature gives us more meaning, and we choose places where we have these two things going on, seeing and hiding. Okay, it's a different story that the emotional part of being attached to a landscape is not addressed by the evolutionary psychologists, but the whole idea of that savannas, these grassy lands where humans actually learned to walk, on the high grassy lands instead of climbing trees, and they started exploring the wide world. They started hunting. They started progressing towards a new tomorrow. Now, built landscape rests upon a culturally shaped view of nature held by society. So you have raw material, then you have the human agency, which is changing it, and what is expressed as a reflection of human values. When I was talking about landscapes, the kind of spatial landscapes, converting natural archetypes to spatial archetypes. Now, rivers and mountains are a natural archetype that allow myths to be created and spread. Okay. Nature is deified. Rocks, trees, wells, and springs are the receptacles for spirits. In our iconography, we have seen this many a times. For example, Yaksha, they're the earth spirits, tree spirits. They have been, this is the very famous Yaksha in the Bihar Museum. What is it? I've forgotten the name. She's a very famous one. Yaksha. She is housed in the Patna Museum. Okay, I'm forgetting the title of it, but she's a Yaksh. So Itihas, as I said, when we were talking about texts in the first few weeks, the Mahabharata and the other great Sanskrit epic, the Ramayana, collectively known as Itihas or history, and they contain the cultural frameworks of the concepts of Karma, Dharma, Atma, and Avatar. Okay. Now, coming to reality. Okay. The Medicine Mountain, Jakhu Hill, Shimla. Okay. I don't know if you've seen, have you seen Jakhu Hill?
No, I'm not. I've not come to Himachal at all.
You haven't, Sushila?
No, that's one Himalayan state that I've not seen.
Okay, you need to come. When
No,
I'm
I
there,
know.
you need to come there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is this hill in Shimla. It's called Jakhu. There are so many monkeys there, and the state government really has to deal with, putting them in truckloads and just leave them in the lower Himalayas. Okay, so they're a menace. I have had many occasions. My aunt lives in Shimla. I would go to the mall road, get an ice cream, and the monkey would be there asking for it. Many occasions they take clothes away of people which are hanging, and they start wearing the clothes also.
Goodness me. Yeah.
Yeah. So Jakhu has a temple dedicated to Hanuman.
These are what, ordinary rhesus monkeys or those langurs?
They're rhesus monkeys.
Okay.
Yeah. And you do know that langurs are hired in court, even today in district courts in Delhi and in Shimla, to take care of the rhesus monkeys. The langurs take care of the monkeys, to ward them off. The langurs are also, na, they pelt stones with their tails.
No, I didn't know this.
Okay.
Goodness me. I'm learning a lot about monkeys today. Okay.
I can't tell you, Sushila, years ago, I was in the district court in Delhi, okay? And I tell you, this is like real. So one of the guys, he comes, he says, वो file मिली नहीं. तो जज बोलते क्या हो गया, क्यों नहीं मिली file? You know how it is, na, in India. Sir, वो ना बंदर उठा के ले गया. He said, what? We all started laughing. He said, वो लंगूर वाला नहीं आया, the judge says. बुलाओ उसको, ये बहुत आने लग गए हैं दोबारा. So this is a real thing. Imagine court ki file has been taken away by the monkey. Like how?
My file is somewhere.
This can only happen in India. Seriously.
I guess, yeah.
District court. A rhesus monkey has gone away with the file.
Yeah. There's a movie, Hindi movie called something very funny. It's about one of these fellows who catches these monkeys and how he doesn't like his job, and something
Oh,
like that.
really? Oh, I don't
He
know.
dresses up like a langur and finally he gets caught and people kind of target him because he's dressed like a monkey, like a langur.
Okay, I don't. I tell me the name if you come to know.
It's I think it's the noise they make to attract the monkeys or scare them. Some Eba you or something like that. It's called.
Okay, okay, okay.
It's that how they imitate the sounds of the
Yeah,
monkey.
and there used to be this monkey. I used to go for my theater classes back in the day, and I remember I used to come back by bus. And there used to be this monkey who used to stand at the bus stop every day at the same time, and he would come, and the conductor had a seat reserved for him.
Did you buy a ticket?
But that's so hilarious.
No,
Seriously.
no. In Bandipur, I saw a monkey waiting. There's a road through this Bandipur National Forest. Whatever. I don't know how. There's a highway,
Mm.
and there's a speed breaker. So whenever all these trucks carrying fruits and vegetables, they slow down because of the speed breaker. The monkey jumps on the truck, takes the fruit or whatever they have, and then gets down by the time he speeds up. So it's waiting at the speed breaker.
Really?
And now the drivers and people are used to it, so they give it things anyway. So it knows what to do and it's always sitting there.
And long back, I think I was in school at that time. I had gone to Calcutta for a show there, a theater play with Sri Ram Center for Performing Arts. So I saw a monkey dressed in a very polka dotted dress, and I told my mother I made a deal with the guy. I didn't know any better. I was just loved monkeys, and I was very fascinated that Michael Jackson has a chimpanzee. You know.
Mm.
So I thought, oh, the monkey, I'll send the monkey off to do my daily, tasks that my mother gives me, like getting milk from mother dairy, things
Okay.
like that. This was my vision. Okay. And I had a dog also in Delhi. So I called up my mom from Calcutta. I said, Mama, I'm getting a monkey. My mother was aghast. She said that the dog will stay or the monkey. You cannot get it. So I went back to that person, the Madari, and the monkey's name was Rosie. I still remember. And she was all dressed up. He was ready to sell it to me. He was selling it to me. I can't believe it. I was doing that. I was buying a monkey.
I never thought of getting a monkey to do some chores, here and there.
Yeah.
But that's a nice idea, actually.
Yeah, just say, pani le aao.
Do this.
Like, have some use of your intelligence instead of just stealing, all of these bananas and things.
Correct. Earn your living. We'll feed you do all these chores.
And I can just imagine, like, if my son were to say that to me, I would be so shocked.
Don't give him these ideas.
Oh, sometimes he will tell me, he will like, Mama, can we buy a child also? She says, yeah, I can play with the child. And if we don't want the child, we can return. He used to say that when he was 6, not anymore. Yeah. Can we buy a child? Or if not a child, can we buy an orangutan?
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. So the story goes that a battle broke out between Ravana's demon army and Rama's animal army. Now, stress on the word demon and animal army, okay, because this will become relevant. Lakshman was badly wounded in the battle, seemed that he would die before sunrise, and the monkeys and bears decided that Hanuman must leap to the Himalayas and bring back the healing herb from the medicine mountain to save Lakshman's life. This is mentioned in Valmiki's Ramayana. Huh? Hanuman leapt over the ocean and across the whole of India to the Himalayas. And beyond the Himalayas, actually, he went. He took a long time to find the fabled medicine mountain. Hanuman found it at last, covered with herbs, but he didn't know which was the magic healing herb. Now, because he didn't know, he just uprooted the entire mountain and got it. He wrapped his arms around the whole mountain, pulled it out, lifted it into the palms of his hand, and flew back to Lanka. On his way, the sun began to rise. Hanuman decided to capture the sun under his arm so that he could arrive back before sunrise in time to save Lakshman. The healing herb was picked, given to Lakshman. He was healed and filled with energy. Okay, so this is the story that associates the Ramayana story with the Himalayas.
Okay, so this is the hill in Shimla that is considered.
They say, so I'm not trying to make a correlation, but this is where there are few places in the Himalayas where the story is very, very, the locals believe it so much that they have no other ways about it. They say, oh, this is Hanuman, this is Jakhu Mandir, this is where the monkeys live, and this is where he is. Okay, this is the mountain he kind of came to. He stepped on this and he picked up the mountain nearby, and this is the story there. Now there are lots of monkeys on this hill, and there is a nexus between the peanut seller and the prasad seller with the monkey. So what you do is, and this is very, very, the economics of it also. You go there, you buy the prasadam. Okay. The monkey will take it from you. Okay.
And give it back to the fellow?
No, the monkey will take it. Then the person will come back to the seller. He'll buy another one. So what happens? The seller is gaining. He's selling it twice. He knows the monkey will take it. Business is very good. So the pact is that the monkey is not going to pick up from the seller.
Okay.
Because wo to free milega na. It will be free for the monkey.
Okay, yes.
So the monkey takes it from the buyer.
Okay.
Because when he takes it from the buyer goes back and buys another one. So there's no loss. It's only gain for the seller and for the monkey. So both of them are very clever. They have a pact.
Okay.
This I've experienced myself. And they're very conveniently, this just stand ki, now you better get the goons. The monkeys are goons there.
Okay, they're almost human, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Jakhu Mandir. Okay, so this is what they say. Now in the Valmiki Ramayana, in the Yudh Kand, okay, Yudh Kand, Ram, Lakshman and monkey warriors fell due to the Brahmastra of Indrajit. Okay, Jambavan asked Hanuman to bring 4 herbs from the herbal mountain named Aushadhi mountain. They were Mrit Sanjeevani, which is capable of restoring the dead to life. Vishalaya Karani, capable of extracting weapons and healing all wounds inflicted by weapons. Suvarna Karani, restoring the body to its original complexion. And Sandhani, the great herb, capable of joining severed limbs of fractured bone. So again, Hanuman uproots it and gets so that he is this thing. So in Valmiki's Ramayana, this is mentioned in the Yudh Kand, and many interpolations it is talked about like that, the Aushadhi mountain. Interestingly, even now, the locals in the Western Himalayas, they talk about the magic mountain. They talk about some herbs that people know of and that you really have to go to very high altitude to get it. So locals have some kind of knowledge, even in the Great Himalayan National Park. But many of these things are very protected. So you just can't uproot and do all this. But there is this whole thing about magical herbs even today. Okay. Now, the Sanjeevani is known for its appearance in the Valmiki Ramayana. Lakshman was seriously wounded, we know. There's another version where Ram is sent, he sends physician Sushena to help revive his brother. Again, the Himalayas are mentioned as Nag Shrestha Himavant. Okay, Nag Shrestha Himavant. So they're associating it with the snake. Okay. So Shena tells Hanuman that the plant grows in the Dronagiri range of the Himalayas.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah, the
Dronagiri.
Dunagiri, Dronagiri. Yes. And it gives off a strange light, enabling it to be spotted in the dark. And that's how Hanuman got it. Now, this particular painting is from the Kangra school, 1790. This was basically Nain Sukh's workshop and his lineage of artists. Okay, this is a very illusionistic approach to landscape, where here you can see, because it's from the Kangra school, even the hat that Hanuman is wearing is very reminiscent of the Gaddis, if you see the hat. Yeah, and he's giving the herbs, yeah, to Ram and all the Vanars are kind of around, and you can see the Kangra fort here.
Okay,
right.
So they change the location itself.
Yeah, they change because they're adapting it to their own. You can see langurs and all.
All right.
Now, again, so another version is that the present path is not Jakhu but Uttaranchal. So Dronagiri village in Uttarakhand Himalayas, mountain worshipped by locals that is believed to be the one Hanuman disfigured during his search for the life-saving herb. Disfigured, okay, that's important. The village is situated at 11,800 feet. Bus ride for 45 kilometers from Joshimath to Jumma. And I found this, so on the net it's given. And this village has 400 Bhutia families. And there are 7 glaciers in this area, Bagini, Changbag, and Niti glaciers. I don't know if you have explored these areas. Have you?
I'm not sure about this Dronagiri village, but I saw a Dronagiri temple. I'm not sure where it's located. It is in the Kumaon region somewhere.
Okay. I think this area is in the Chamoli district.
Chamoli district. Yeah, because it's 45 kilometers from Joshimath. This is not far from Joshimath because they were saying there's a route to Karnaprayag and so on, which ultimately reaches Joshimath, but I think it's more than 45 kilometers. There is a Dronagiri temple, but it's a Devi. So I'm a little confused about what they meant.
No, I'll tell you that confusion will be sorted. So here you get rare herbs and hunters looking illegally to hunt the musk deer and Himalayan bear. And villagers, they survive by breeding sheep, gathering herbs to sell in the city. And these herbs, they're sold for a fortune. They are natural Viagras that the locals collect from the grassy areas, the kidi herb. Even in Himachal, you find it actually, it looks like a caterpillar, mossy caterpillar.
Yeah, I know what it's called.
You must have seen
or something like that. Yes. In Nepal also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, according to Drona, this is the Dronagiri peak.
Yes, okay. I've seen this from Auli.
Yeah. How close have you been to this?
Like this distance. This seems to be from Joshimath, this picture. I'll send you my picture of Dronagiri and the Dronagiri temple, which is not connected with this mountain.
Or it may be, I'll tell you. It may be also. So in this story, Hanuman is bad. He destroyed the right flank of the mountain Parbat Dev that they worship. And during the Treta Yuga, they say that Hanuman flew in to find the plant to revive Lakshman. And the villagers of Dronagiri did not allow him passage. So what happened is, the myth goes that Hanuman disguised himself as a mendicant and begged an elderly woman in the village to help him locate the magic mountain where the herb grew. The woman, she pointed up to the area for Hanuman to find. And Hanuman in turn disfigured the mountain because he had to take that away. He could not recognize which plant he needed. And the old woman, the villagers, they banished her, and all women were barred since then from ritual worship of the mountain. Okay. So since Hanuman destroyed the hillside, temples in the area do not house Hanuman's idol. They do not worship him. So maybe that's the reason that the Devi is worshipped.
Because it's a Shakti Peeth and they kept saying Hanuman and I was confused. I was wondering who this was.
Yeah.
I think this is a sort of explanation for that.
Yeah.
And somehow they didn't associate it with that mountain. They said the hill on which the temple itself is there is Dronagiri.
Okay, so he must have stepped on it, or that story must have gone like this. Okay.
See, he will not take a mountain like that because that doesn't have anything on it.
No, but he must have stepped on that mountain.
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like even in Jakhu, he did not uproot that temple, but his footprints are there. That's why it's worshipped. Okay. But he's not worshipped here because that whole flank is missing. So they are angry. And it points to a lot of things like conservation also. So I also, of course, we don't know Hanuman came and lifted it. That's another alien theory altogether. But the point is that why would one, if we look at the metaphor and we look at the underlying meaning, could it be conservation that if you destroy the mountains for your personal use, or however authentic it may be, or in your intentions may be good, hurting the mountains is unpardonable. Conservation. And also these areas are prone to, deforestation, landslides. So maybe the story emerged in that kind of context. We can think of things like that in terms of conservation, preservation. You never know, right?
It's possible.
Yeah, that even the gods are not pardoned for for something like this. And thinking that it's happening in Uttarakhand, where landslides are a big issue, you know, compared to Himachal, there are more landslides in Uttarakhand, right?
Maybe more rivers. That's why I don't know for whatever reason.
Yeah, yeah. So during Jagar in the village, Jagar is, you know, like in the Western Himalayas, you have the Gur tradition. In the Central Himalayas, you have the Jagar tradition. And if you want to know more about Jagar, Sushila, go to YouTube and Dr. Aditya Malik's talk on Jagars, the gods, justice and God, something like that, is really a very good lecture. He
Okay.
has he was the vice chancellor of Nalanda University, and he comes from a very educated family. Kapila Vatsyayan was his aunt, his father Subhash Malik. He actually donated books to me for the
Okay.
library. Yeah, very nice person. He was educated in University College London in the 1950s, you know, that time. So taught by
Right.
God and child and all. So Aditya Malik is his son. He's an anthropologist. So he's done a lot of work on the Jagar tradition. You know, there's this god with the Golu Devta, the god of
Yeah,
justice.
yeah. I went to that temple.
Yeah. Even I've been to that temple. So the Jagar tradition is you get into that spirit of the Dev Parvat. Okay. So there are different Jagars, different deities get into you. So the Dev Parvat Jagar in the Holy Mountain appears in the body of the medium. The medium is known as the Pashuva in this part of the Himalayas. Okay. And the right arm of the medium, symbolic of the right flank of Dronagiri, hangs lifeless till the spirit of the Dev Parvat departs.
Okay.
So basically, who's being channeled? Not Hanuman, but the deity of the mountain
deity
is
of the
channeled.
mountain. Right, right.
Who is hurt, who's lifeless because of the arm taking away.
Right. And
So what
because
is
Hanuman,
worshipped is, yeah.
he took away the mountain, so he's not forgiven.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay,
right.
yeah. So at the annual Ram Leela, all references to Hanuman are deleted here for centuries. So Ram Leela in the village begins with Ram's childhood, moves on to the Swayamvar and ends with his coronation. Nowhere is it mentioned that Hanuman is not mentioned. Though this is, now it is a little different. Now people like in the village, of course, they remember him as Hanuman is not worshipped. You know, it is, they are just not allowed to worship. But it also brings in a lot of tourist revenue when you have places associated with the epics, right?
Right.
So that's why
Right.
they mentioned that Hanuman lifted Sanjeevani here. So that is mentioned. Sri Lanka, for example, I went there a few years ago. I think I went there in 2012. Oh my God, I just love Sri Lanka. It's so beautiful. I think going to Europe is not a great idea than to going to Sri Lanka. The food is amazing, the people are amazing, the culture, yeah. So there's so many places associated with Sita was or where Hanuman went. And you know, this whole tradition of footprints is also very interesting. Like, you know, in the Himalayas, you have Padma Sambhav's footprints
Yes.
everywhere, top of the rocks, Hanuman's footprints, you know, very interesting. In Sri Lanka also, they kind of follow the same thing. And then there was this whole thing about the Ram Setu. And it was there was this Discovery Channel documentary saying that, oh, it is very geologically old and some blah 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 blah. And that documentary was taken over by the Hindu nationalists talking about, oh, ye dekha Discovery mein ye baat hui hai. You know, everything that the Americans say has to be correct. They don't realize that the people who were actually being interviewed were not even full-blown archaeologists. They were like just doing CRM work, cultural resource management work. दो तीन को इकट्ठे करके बोल दिया कि ओ राम सेतु राम ने बनाया था. Like, what nonsense is that? What scientific proof you have? Nobody is even excavated there. So
it's a natural formation, right?
Huh?
It's a natural formation.
A natural formation, and you know, you need to do underwater archaeology to, you know, scientifically assess it. And I don't know why people can't take myths to be metaphors of, we are not saying that these characters didn't exist. I'm saying, okay, these characters existed. They honed on a larger than life image. For example, the Buddha we all know was a person who was born. He never proclaimed he's Buddha. He said that everybody can be enlightened. We made him into God. We started talking about these stories and embellishing. The same would have happened to so many. Shiva became Rudra Shiva, took on the personality of another character in history to enlarge and, expand and, all these cults and all. Okay.
Hmm.
So that's a tradition. So with this, there's another talk that is also there, and I'll urge you to kind of see that one also. Alok Tripathi's Underwater Archaeology. It's on my YouTube channel.
Alok Tripathi. It's
Alok
called what?
Tripathi. I'm forgetting the name. It's on underwater archaeology. Just go through the list of YouTube videos on my lectures.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because these Sunday lectures only I had done one with Alok Tripathi, who's an underwater archaeologist, and he's excavated Dwarka.
Right.
And he actually put me on the team for the underwater archaeology team for Ram Setu also. He's still waiting for funding for that, and he's a very what do you call that, scientific person. He won't believe in all this nonsense and all. And they were having like live shows on TV, and I wrote to them. I said, you don't even have an archaeologist on your team. Like, what nonsense is this? Even on Clubhouse, people will come and talk about Ayodhya, oh, Ram temple and all. ठीक है, Ram was whatever born there, and even the truth is that Babar also made a mosque there, and both are important. It's a part of our history. You cannot destroy something and then say कि Ram वहाँ पैदा हुआ था तो इसको destroy कर दें. There are layers of history, na?
Yeah, it's politically created.
Yeah, politically. And so this person in Clubhouse, so there are about 400 people in that room, okay?
Oh my.
Okay. This an educated Indian Sushila, they talk like that. And I'm listening. And बोलते हैं हमारे पास ना, this guy is saying, हमारे पास ना टाइम नहीं है, आर्कियोलॉजिस्ट को देंगे तो वो तो 2-3 साल लगा देंगे, हमारे पास इतना टाइम नहीं है. Hindus, the state is in peril.
When is it in peril? These people put it in peril.
Yeah, it was never in peril. And so
It has survived centuries. What is it?
Sheila, I have to tell you, this is like really dangerous. 3 weeks ago, I filled up my son's form for a visa, the Indian form, because he's American. The form was fine. I sent it. There was some little signature on some form that I miraculously had to find on my own. And the form I found was not the appropriate form because it had OCI written on it in small. So they sent my entire passport back, even though it said that my mother is very ill and I need to go soon. So lack of sensitivity there. So anyway, I filled up the form again. This time the form has changed. The price of the cashier's check has gone up from $103. It's gone up to $143. Just see, okay, how they loot people. Okay. Now, an emergency visa, if I need an emergency visa, I have to send papers like, okay, if an emergency is there, e-visa you're providing, okay, for people for 30 days. But emergency visa, you have to apply to the embassy or go on your own. Seriously? In an emergency, you're going to do that? Add to the woes of a person who's experiencing an emergency.
Yeah, very silly.
I don't understand the logic. Anyway, so in the form this time, Sushila, the columns, okay, what do you call that? They're asking what religion you are. It's never been asked before in any other form that I filled over the years for my son. Okay. Second thing, they're asking, are you from Pakistan or Pakistan occupied territories, or your grandparents have been from there? Why? They're asking questions which have never been asked in the secular fabric. It always used to jar me when in American universities, they ask you for the race that you're from, like your East Asian, South Asian, whatever. I'm East Asian according to America. America ke East mein. Then religion. Now, these are some things that I have never grown up with. My father was an Indian Foreign Service diplomat. Okay. I have seen a secular India. I've experienced secularism, going to countries, being very proud of my country. But now with questions like what kind of secular democracy are we where we are talking, why is religion important? Why should we write it down?
True.
So if I'm Muslim,
These
I'll
are
be
the American authorities asking you
no
for, right?
Indian
Indian.
embassy.
Oh, the Indian.
My son, I'm Indian. I don't need a
Okay.
visa, but my son is American. He needs a visa.
Right. Okay. You have
So
applied to the Indian.
why are they asking Hindu, Muslim, Christian, or your grandparents were from Pakistan, occupied Kashmir?
What are they going to do about it?
Yeah, what are they going to do about it? Why are they asking religion? So
True. How does it matter? I mean,
how does it matter? Like, this is very weird to me, this kind of shift with of course, we have been noticing this shift in India, but this shift is not healthy for our country.
no, but I don't know what exactly is the agenda now. Are they trying to make it? I mean, it is Hindu dominant. What more can you want? I mean, are they trying to drive out?
My very dear friend Saif, he's a lawyer, constitution lawyer. Family has been for generations in India, very, legal luminary. His grandfather was a chief justice and whatever. He says that for the first time in his life, he's scared of being a Muslim. And somebody who's so rooted in the Indian heritage and culture, literary circuits, having says, he says, I fear reading Urdu in public. When I'm sitting in the airport lounge or something, people look at me. So that kind of experience from within is really sad. Why somebody's like, we've always lived with the principle of togetherness.
Right.
We may have had skirmishes, riots, whatever, but as a nation, we've always been together. We're a country which celebrates Christmas, Eid, Diwali. And with Yogi Adityanath going on his rant about such horrible things,
I mean, I'm scared of him.
People do not feel safe. And for the first time, I used to be so patriotic about my country. I've been here for 18 years now in America. I've never changed my citizenship. I have a green card. So many have become American citizens. But now I feel like, things have become very ugly in India.
True.
Educated means Mussalman hai, bach ke rehna. Educated engineers, doctors talking like that.
Yeah. That change has come.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah, pretty quickly. Yeah. So 2 videos, Aditya Malik's and lecture on this thing. I'll try to post the link on WhatsApp so it's easier for you to find. Okay. Now we also find, this is Sanjeevani Booty, it's called in Ramayana. We also find it in the Mahabharata. Okay. Now Guru Shukracharya, who's mentioned in the Mahabharata, used it to resurrect the Asuras who had been slain by the Devas. Okay. Now the son-in-law of Shukracharya is Yayati. Okay. Yayati is a king who's mentioned in the Mahabharata, who's the ancestor of the Pandavas. This herb is supposed to have helped King Yayati to reverse the aging of his body and regain male vigor. Okay. Yayati is important because Krishna took birth in his clan. Again, the locals always talk about, oh, that thing that makes you, that's the elixir of youth, that makes you young. They talk about it. They say, oh, it is above Nehru Kund. They say you have to walk. It's near Hamta Pass. They even have a direction where area it is. Okay.
I thought it was Yamunotri, but I could be wrong.
No, but everywhere, Western Himalayas, they'll talk about Central Himalayas, they'll talk about Yamunotri. So even in Nepal, they'll talk about it. I'm just telling you that these stories, they are dominating in different parts. So like the Sanjeevani Booty is prevalent in Shimla, in Dunagiri Mountains, and there's another place in Sri Lanka. I'll talk about that also. So ancient dictionaries like the Marathi Sanskrit Girvan Laghu Kosh and the Sanskrit Shabd Kalpadram call the herb Rudanti or Rudantika, meaning a plant that oozes a liquid. Shabd Kalpadram, which is the Sanskrit book, calls it Romanchika, a nerve stimulator that can arouse a patient from a coma. Okay. Now, in Sri Lanka, this is the area. They say Lord Hanuman was instructed by Sugriv. So that's another interpolation of the story, to fetch life-saving herbs which only grew in the Himalayas. Now, Hanuman carried out the whole Himalayan mountain range to Sri Lanka.
Okay.
So, this whole story is that it is believed that parts of the Himalayas fell on 5 places in Sri Lanka, and those 5 places declared as Sanjeevani drops in Sri Lanka, named Dolukunda Sanjeevani Mountain, is one of those places. So this whole tryst with associating yourself with the Himalayas is very important. Associating yourself with the Ramayana, with the Mahabharata, and the Himalayas. These are 3 very, very important things for that pan-Indian consciousness. Okay. So if you remember Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana, yeah, whole world, whole India used to be like empty on Sundays at 10 a.m. Remember?
Yes.
Yeah. So be it north, be it south, east, west, they're all with that thing of their idea towards the epics.
And
Now,
everybody watched the Ramayana, including the community we are currently
yeah,
discussing.
and I think it was a very good thing, because sensitization of culture this way is really good. And at that time, we had the privilege of having this one channel, 1 or 2 channels, which was really now. And so that kind of put us all together. I'm not saying that religiosity did, but I think culture and myths are very important for us as a nation.
I think the Ramayana resonates because it's ultimately a human story.
It's
The
a human
emotions,
story. Huh.
it's the emotions that get you. It is not his great values, and that's also there. But
Yeah, yeah. Even the Mahabharata, for that matter, it's the story of every house.
yes.
Property, women, wealth.
True.
Yeah. So how do you associate Sri Lanka with the Himalayas? So what a clever way of involving Sri Lanka with the Himalayas, the Sanjeevani drops, that one mountain where, so this has become the Himalayas for Sri Lanka. Like, how do you relate it, right? How can you bring the Himalayas here? Oh, he dropped it.
Correct. Since he took the trouble to bring it all the way, he can as well.
Yeah, he dropped it. Okay.
Okay.
So in the medieval period, you find Zain al-Abidin, who was from the Mughal court, painted. So even like, this whole thing about Hindutva and all, Islam has been very, very instrumental in depicting Hindu myths. This is from the Mughal period. Zain al-Abidin, he has painted Hanuman bringing the Sanjeevani booty. Isn't that amazing? Even today, Muslim musicians, like there's so many, what was that? Ghulam Mustafa Khan, who actually, Ustad Mustafa Khan, who died recently, he was from Calcutta. He had many renditions coming from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. One of the most beautiful Dhrupad renditions are sung by Muslim musicians who trace their ancestry from Akbar's court. They sing odes to Hindu gods and goddesses with so much of veneration and devotion, being Muslims.
Yeah, actually, there are many temples even in the south where the Muslim invasion was not significant. There is always some tradition which a nearby mosque will do. Any temple, like in Bangalore, we have this Karaga where I think during March they do walk on fire and pierce needles and that kind of worship.
Is it like Sufi, the Shia kind of thing?
No,
on
it's not
Muharram?
that bad. It's a form of worship where you have to essentially carry the god and all the decorations, carry it and go. I mean, you put your body through difficulties, and it's a procession that goes from one temple to the other. And you're carrying the god. You're not removing the actual murti, but it's an utsav murti.
So the Muslims and the Hindus do it?
No, the Hindus do it, but always that procession stops at the nearby mosque, and the Maulvi, right? He gives water to these people who are performing those hardships.
How beautiful, right?
It's like there are many things like that in many places where there is a nearby mosque which provides a kind of service during these festivals and this kind of processions. Many.
And I don't know if you know, but Shias, in Delhi, for example, there is a locality, I'm forgetting the name, but there, when they have the story that when all of this was happening in Iraq, right? That's where the Shia sect is dominant, and there was this war where they were fighting some evil ruler. The Shias, Muslims, and his best friend, who was a Brahmin, went for that war. And since that, the tradition is that the Brahmins and the Shia Muslims together, they go in a procession
Right,
where
right.
even the Brahmins beat themselves up. So,
Oh,
yeah. So it's a very Muslim kind of tradition. And so, Sheila, the epitome of all of this, when my father died, my father's nurse, who's Muslim, Ali,
right.
he stayed on for another month. He didn't take his salary.
Right. He just wanted to be there for the family.
Yeah. And he did all the ablutions with me in the Ganga.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. See, the man on the street doesn't have these problems.
Yeah, this is religion. And then he urged me, he said, Sonali Didi, I really want to do something for Papa, he used to call. I said, what? He says, can I have children who are orphans who live in the madrasa come home and recite the kalma? I said, of course. He called them. I organized food and I organized books to give them.
Okay.
So there were about 18 children who came
Oh,
to my house, and whole day they recited the kalma for my father. My chacha, who's a die-hard RSS, he called me. He said, "Tum kya kar rahi ho?"
come on. This is.
I was like, "Kya kar rahi ho?" He said, "तुम मुसलमानों को बुला रही हो?" I said, "हाँ, तो Buddhist priest भी आए हैं, Hindu Brahmins भी आए हैं." I said, my father was like this. So I don't understand why I cannot do that. The children were so happy, I can't tell you.
Correct, correct. Yeah. That's such a nice thing for the children to do.
And how did it help me? It helped me cope with the grief. My father was the kind of person who used to keep the Quran, the Bible, and the Puranas also with him, the texts. That's how we were.
Yes, largely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now there is this, I came across this thing on the internet actually. So internet is a good source if you choose it rightly. Right. So somebody has worked, I don't know his Mutralingam something, I'll tell you the name, I've written it. He did a study on botanical clues that are in the Ramayana. Okay. So according to him, Valmiki's Ramayana is the most important source for botanical information, very useful in knowing botanical identity of various species of plants, extensive lists of plants in their specific geographic location. And from the various plant varieties described in the epic as Ram travels from Ayodhya to Lanka through the forests of Chitrakoot, Dandaka Aranya, which is Panchvati in Madhya Pradesh, Kishkinda, Lanka, and the Himalayan mountains situated beyond Kailash. So epic could only have been written by a person with deep knowledge of landscape and its vegetation. That's number one. The area covers 4 major ecosystems: tropical deciduous forest, dry and moist deciduous forest, evergreen tropical forests of Lanka, and the alpine semi forests of the Himalayan area. Okay. Now, what are the 4 types of what?
That's really fascinating that there should be such detailed descriptions of.
Yes, yeah. So
and
it
across
almost
the country, I mean, my God.
Yeah, and I was actually amazed that this work has been done, and it's quite detailed. So there are 4 sentiments dominating the entire forest environment: Shanta, Madhura, Raudra, and Vibhatsa. Okay. And it's interesting that even when I walk in the forest, some forests make you feel fearful. Some make you feel very calm, sweet. So that ras is, that nature's rasa is that the fact that it has been mentioned also in the Ramayana about the 4 rasas of nature. It's very, very interesting. So they reflect a supremacy of nature, the type of forests that are described. So in the Himalayan alpine region, the area, so if you can see, right, the whole journey, this whole has been mapped botanically, like floral and faunal work has been done here.
Hmm.
So the area located between the two mountains, Kailash and Rishabh. So this is that area. Okay. Area covered thousands of yojanas according to the Yuddhakund. Kailash is situated beyond the Trans-Himalayan region, and it is confirmed in the Ramayana that Hanuman crosses the Himalayas to reach Kailash. There are three mountains in the Trans-Himalayan region, namely Kailash, Rishabh, and Mahodaya. Okay, also known as the Aushadhi mountain in the Yuddhakand. The southern side of the mountain has a thick thick growth of forest on the southern side, where main plants having curative properties were found. They are described in the Ramayana as glowing and aromatic.
Hmm.
Okay. Now, Valmiki has given importance to the Aushadhi peaks where he rushed to get the 4 plants. So I've already mentioned the 4 plants to you. Mrit Sanjeevani, Vishalakarani, Suvarnakarani, and Sandhani. Okay.
Okay.
Now,
Why did
yeah.
he go to Kailash?
In that direction, they talk about Kailash. We went beyond Kailash. So basically the Himalayan area only. Now, whether he went to Dronagiri or to Kailash, we do not know. But there are certain sections in different interpolations of the Ramayana which mention it. So the person who has worked on this botanical thing, he's trying to say that this is the area and this is where we find medicinal plants. So it could be this area as well.
The Kailash area.
Yeah. Okay. So what is Sanjeevani? So the research, according to this person, indicates 3 species as possible: Cressa cretica, Selganilla bryropteris, and Desmotricum fimbriatum, Jivanti rudanti plant species.
Okay.
So
I know Dr. Ganesh Iyer.
You know that? Who's he?
Yeah. He is in this University of Agricultural Sciences in Bangalore.
Okay. Okay. So do
He
you?
used to contribute a lot to our journals.
Okay. So
Once
maybe,
every time.
yeah. So maybe you can
Maybe
ask
I can
him.
talk to him. Yeah.
Yeah. It'll be great if you can have a conversation with him about this research.
Okay, let me see if I can get in touch with him and if he can contribute.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that they have found possible species for the herb, that's really interesting, you know?
Okay.
Okay. Now the hunt is on, the funny side of it. It remains a mythical plant, just like Soma. And I'll talk about Soma next week. Okay. So it remains a mythical plant. Locals claim it can still be located if an aggressive search is mounted in the remote region of Uttarakhand bordering Tibet. State government of Uttarakhand, actually, I read somewhere 6 crores they gave to locate the mythical herb.
Such things they'll do.
They will do such things, but they won't educate illiterate people, and they will create problems, but they will hunt for the mythical herb.
The more mythical it is, the greater will be the.
Yeah, exactly. Now, culturally, there are certain plants which are very important in the Himalayas. One of them being the Himalayan cedar, Cedrus deodara. It's worshipped as a divine tree. The word deodar can be split into 2, deo meaning Dev and God meaning, and daru denoting tree. Deodar, Devdar, Deodar. Now you went to that place.
Yeah, I saw plenty of these trees. It's so beautiful. It's
so beautiful. And they're very fragrant. So they're always associated with the gods because they're so fragrant. And another quality in them is that no insect comes onto them.
The wood is
yeah. So the forest which is covered by Deodar is believed to be a suitable place for Hindu sages who were great devotees of Lord Shiva. And sages preferred to perform penance in these forests. Now, Sanskrit literature mentions this forest as Daruka Van. For example, in the Kishkinda Kand of the Valmiki Ramayana, this is the place where Ram instructed his followers to search for Sita, and Ravan in the forest covered by Lodhra trees, Padmaka, Himalayan wild cherry, and in the woods of Devadar. So there were different directions. So it's almost like the person who knew it knew that, okay, how we do a search, go north, go east, go west.
Yeah, go everywhere basically.
And here it's qualified by the kind of forests you'll find. We know that the Deodar trees cannot be found anywhere but the Himalayas. They grow at a certain altitude, right?
Mm.
Okay. Now you also find the Bhojpatra, the Himalayan birch, Betula utilis. The tree grows between 11 to 12,000 feet and marks the end of the tree line in the Himalayas. And its historical significance is that it's a thin bark that comes off extensively. It's actually just like that, and ancient texts were written on it. I remember when I was 1986, 11 years old, I went on a trek to Biaskund. And on the way, I got that Himalayan birch.
Bhojpatra, yeah.
And I took it off and I was so fascinated. You know, this was my first face off. And at that time, 1986, you know, the Himalayas were still quite protected. They were so beautiful. I still remember walking that entire stretch, crossing a river, falling in that stream, going and even seeing a Himalayan sloth bear, which is, you don't even get to see all of that. And today that whole path, Sushila, is just filled with urban, horrible buildings. It's so sad that from 1986 to 2021, the landscape has totally changed for the worse.
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
but this is the cheer, right? The chid or cheer, however you pronounce it. The
I don't
Bhojpatra
know,
is seen as a cheer, no?
The cheer you're talking about, the pine.
Yeah.
No,
Oh,
no.
sorry. No, okay. Cheer is probably the other pine, the normal pine.
The normal pine. And you know,
Right. Sorry.
with the pine tree, pine tree actually is not good for the mountains because it takes in a lot of water and it takes the water away from other plants. Okay.
But
So
the pine grows there naturally, I think.
yeah, it
Or
grows
it's
naturally. Yeah.
no.
But the banjok is very much better, the oak tree. But a banjok is regularly cut for its wood.
Hmm.
You know,
That's the
people,
silver oak you're talking about, right?
yeah.
The
And
silver.
yesterday in the talk, one of the persons in the audience was talking, I didn't even know this, that in Shimla, they would poison the trees.
Yeah, that activist, I don't know who she was.
Yeah, she owns this very old British cottage. I actually searched her. I was like, who is she? You know, Sunnymead cottage in Shimla, which was
Okay.
owned by some architect. And it's a very beautiful Thach architecture, the old kind of architecture in the Himalayas. And she has a B&B, very expensive, 8,000 a night.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That's why they can be activists. It's easy for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Not anything. I don't think I'm judgmental, but you know, I almost feel that, and I've noticed this, people in the Himalayas, they listen to people who are affluent.
that's everywhere, I think. And more so because the differences are much higher in the Himalayas.
Orchard owners, as if they have a license to talk. And they are the ones who actually, and I won't say everybody, but most of them are the ones who are actually destroying the Himalayas. You know, with
Yeah,
these
true.
orchards and all, that is actually not good for the mountains at all.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So you're saying the pine is also not a natural thing in the Himalayas.
No,
It's
no,
the
no.
oak,
Pine is natural. I'm just saying that
excessive pines.
excessive pine
Excessive.
is not good. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Brockington establishes a relationship between some names of monkeys and that of the mountains. So he has a point of view that Anjaneya, Hanuman's other name, is named after Anjanagiri, a mountain on the southern side of Kailash. Could it be? I tried locating the name of the southern side of Kailash. I couldn't find it.
No, there's a myth in south. See, Kishkinda is in Karnataka.
Yeah.
Kishkinda is where Hanuman was born or whatever.
Hmm.
His mother's name is Anjana. And there's an Anjanadri hilltop in Hampi.
In
Beautiful.
Hampi? Yeah,
Yeah.
but Kailash, I do not know.
I've not heard.
Yeah,
This-
even I have not heard. Then,
Anjaneya are associated with Anjana.
yeah, I know Anjaneya, Hanuman's other name. I know that, but I didn't know. I didn't know about Hampi's thing. And of course, in all of this that I'm talking, I'm not taking in other parts because we are just
Right.
focused on the Himalayas.
No, because the
Otherwise,
name came up, I thought I'll mention.
yeah, no, good. That's how we also gain knowledge, no, from each other. Yeah. Jambavat is mentioned as the king of bears, but there is a mountain by name Jambunad with a similar name. So according to Brockington, he's, linguistically, he's kind of saying that actually all these characters are named after the mountains themselves. Okay. Now, this is interesting. Vanars are Vanara, or the people of the forest. So just to take it literally is not kind of a great idea. Maybe they're talking about a totem, a monkey totem, Kapi, on their flag. Jambavan, the bear, is called a Vanara. Okay. Valmiki could not have mistaken a bear for a monkey. If he knows his botanical so well details, I'm sure he knows the difference. I remember when I was in Egypt and I was, I don't know, somebody in the middle of the night tried to pull me, and the nomad was saying, "Oh, it must be a fox." I said, "No, it was a human hand. I know the difference between a human hand and a fox." So I found that so funny. Anyway, so they were perhaps forest dwellers who helped Ram in his quest for Sita. And Hanuman's superhuman achievements were inconceivable for a mere mortal because it involved swinging the air, climbing trees, and the nearest animal whose abilities matched up was a monkey.
Monkey, yes.
Yeah, and the Vanaras in time came to be associated with the monkey, which was their clan emblem or totem. So this sounds more plausible to me.
Yes. And that splitting of that Vanara as Vana and Nara sounds logical.
Yeah.
Actually.
And also I feel that taking on the element, in ancient, if we know this from prehistoric times, when people went for hunting, they would do rituals. They would also sometimes, like in Egypt, for example, they would wear headgear. Like, when they are mummifying the dead, the priest would wear the headgear of Anubis, the jackal god, who is identified with death. Why are they doing it? Because they're taking on the spirit of that animal. Why are they worshipping the crocodile god in Egypt? Okay, because they want the violent and the terror kind of nature of those animals to be tamed. Okay, so here I almost feel with what was expected, okay, who fits the bill? The monkey fits, because you take on the spirit of the monkey, because monkeys are very agile. They jump, they're fast. We all also use this. You're behaving like a monkey. You're jumping like a monkey. Maybe this kind of play of words. And we're stupid enough to believe that it was actually monkey. It's like maybe the totem of that clan was the monkey. Right? Okay. Now, again, Oshadhi Parvatam is the alpine region, semi-forest in the Trans-Himalayan region. Again, this is the area. His name is the Biodiversity Project, Amrita Lingam Murugesan. Amrita Lingam.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Amritalingam Murugesan. Okay.
Yeah. So botanical details have been mentioned, incidentally adds to the authenticity of what is the Ramayana in a certain way. Number one, why Valmiki gives information which clarifies areas of dispute, points out the plant's geography and distribution, giving ethnic information. Valmiki is very clear about which plant grows where. And we find, because he never says Deodar grows in Sri Lanka. Only a person, who has knowledge, okay? His information regarding the existing of 3 varieties of Ashoka, the Ashoka plant, where the Ashoka tree where Sita takes refuge. So red, yellow, and blue have led scholars to restudy the Saraj Ashok, because Valmiki also brings out new and forgotten uses of plants. Plant varieties and the progressive ecozones from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka, the forest of Chitrakoot, Dandakaranya, Panchavati, Kishkinda, Lanka, and the Himalayan home of Sanjeevani prove that the epic was at least written in the subcontinent. Okay. Again, in the Balkand, let's see what the time is. We can take a break.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's take a break.
Okay.
10-minute break.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. I'll make some tea.
All right.
I really need it in the morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, so in the Balkand, you have the story of the king of Himalaya, who's Himavat, his daughter Uma. Okay, so I'm going to read some passages. Okay, oh, and these are translations. O Lord, I desire to hear the story of this holy river which traverses the three paths. How does the sacred Ganga passing through the three worlds merge at last in ocean? On this request, Sri Vishwamitra began to narrate the origin and genesis of the sacred river. O Ram, the great Himavat, Lord of the Himalayas, the treasury of all precious metals, had two daughters. So Ram is being told the story, okay, who were unsurpassed in loveliness on earth. Their mother, Meena, the wife of Himachala, Himavat, was the daughter of Mount Meru. Her elder daughter was named Ganga and the younger Uma. The Devas, wishing to observe certain sacred rites, asked for Ganga to promote the success of their undertaking, and with the permission of her father, took her away with them. Himachala, mindful of the good of all beings, gave his daughter Ganga, the purifier of the whole world, to the gods, thinking it to be his duty to do so. The gods, supremely gratified, took his daughter Ganga and, blessing all, left Himachala. Okay. Now, again addressing Ram, O prince of the house of Raghu, Raghukul, that was his kula. The other daughter of Himachala, named Uma, practiced great asceticism, considering it to be her chief wealth. Himachala gave his ascetic daughter Uma, who was venerated by the whole world, to Sri Mahadev in marriage, thinking him to be a worthy consort. O Ram, now I have told you of the two daughters of Himachala, revered by the whole world, the river Ganga and Uma Devi. O my son, O chief of disciples, I have related to you the story of Sri Ganga, accompanying the Devas to heaven. The beautiful daughter of the king of Himalaya, once resident in heaven, is the charming river Ganga, whose waters destroy all sin. So we talk about setting the stage for Ganga being so important. She's mentioned in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. Ganga, we all know, is the purest of pure. However dirty they may have it be, but the myths kind of purify her existence. Now, all the gods and rishis were full of joy and adored Lord Shiva and goddess Uma as they worshipped them with grateful hearts. Uma was filled with wrath and said, O Devas, your action has filled me with displeasure. You shall not escape the consequences. Then Uma, shining like the sun, took water in the palm of her hand and pronounced a curse on the gods, saying, O Devas, you have prevented me from bearing a son. May you be childless from this day. May your wives be without progeny. So she was also a very angry goddess. So some of the paragraphs of this thing, basically, they got Shiva so much embroiled in activities that he did not have time for Uma. So she's giving a curse. Okay. Still not appeased, Uma cursed the earth also and said, O earth, you shall never remain in one form. You shall have many masters. O witless one, you shall never bear a son, since you have prevented me from becoming a mother. Sri Mahadev, seeing the Devas discomfited, prepared to depart to the northern region of the Himalayas. There on a peak named Himavat Prabhava, he engaged in prolonged yogic practices together with Uma. So, O Ram, I've told you, one of the two daughters of the Himalayas, now with Lakshman. Listen to the tale of the other daughter of Himalaya named Ganga. Okay. So this is one of the stories that goes on about how Uma came into being, how Ganga came into being, and how Uma was very, very upset and how she died. And then, of course, Parvati comes and then they have children, Ganesh, Kartikeya, right? Okay, Rama and his persona. Narad in the Balkan described Rama as deep as the ocean and unyielding as the Himalayas. In his wrath, he resembles the fire at the end of time. Yet he rivals the earth in his forbearance. Okay. When Ravan came to take him away from Sita by force, she tells him, I am faithful to Ram, my husband, the equal of great Indra, unshakable as a great mountain, imperturbable as the great sea. I'm faithful to Ram, the great armed, great chested prince who moves with the boldness of a lion-like man, a lion among men. So this mountain metaphor is used a lot in the text. So Ram's body assaulted by weapons in the battle with Ravan was like a mountain bearing thunderbolts unflinchingly. Rama's patience and valor was like the Himalayas. Assuming the form of a mountain at will, he would prevent the glorious powers, the sun and moon from rising. This is mentioned in the Aranyakand. So mountains have constantly been shown as a metaphor. Now we come to Pahari paintings. So I have to give this example because the Ramayana and the Mahabharata are oftentimes illustrated. Of course, later down the line, I'll be talking in detail about different Pahari paintings, schools of paintings also. So favorite themes of Pahari paintings was the illustrations of the Ramayana, which tells the story of Ram. This is one of the illustrations from the Kangra school. Here, this is also from the Kangra school, where the fort is also always shown. So the Katoch dynasty, and it's one of the oldest living dynasties of the world. And one credit to this dynasty is they were never routed by the British.
Okay.
They're the only dynasty in this part which were never defeated. So they take great pride. I know the descendants of the Katoch dynasty. The son, he's in his early 30s now. His name is Ambikeshwar. Aishwarya is his father, and then his mother. So here Sita in that orangey vermilion dress is sitting, and Hanuman is in his diminutive form where he has come to meet her. And of course, look at the Rakshasas. They look so grotesque.
They're kind of cute, actually.
Yeah, very cute, especially look at them. So
all three of them, they look sad.
Sleeping, they must be so tired of protecting her. Okay. Okay. Now, some places associated with the legend of Ramayana. There is this Shringi Rishi temple. I've been here. It's near Banjar in the Tirthan Valley. It is attended. So Shringi Rishi, he is known to have attended the Puthreshti Yagna, which was organized by Raja Dashrath, after which Lord Ram was born. So Shringya Rishi, he's known in the text as Shringya Rishi, Rishi Shringya.
Yeah, he's associated with Sringeri in the south.
Yeah, so Sringeri Patnam, right? So again, he's associated with Banjar because, of course, they have to have different places, different place names. Now, also this association became more pronounced in the later periods, finding these places which were associated with the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. You know, different periods have had finding those places, and those place names live on because that allows the myth to live on. Because if you have something tangible, which is not in the abstract, which is not a story, which you can touch, feel, it makes it even more believable, right?
Yeah.
Now, okay. Now, having become sad after the death of his sons, Vashisht, he threw himself in the river with his hands and feet tied. Now, this is interesting because most of the rishis, even today, these great seers, when they die, they are actually tied and they're put into the river.
Oh.
Yes. Now, the river released his bond. What?
Following this, what he did, is it?
Yeah, so it almost seems because he was a sage, so they are not cremated, but they are put in the river. You know, there is this Ram Sharnam, which is a very, very big kind of thing. Ram Sharnam is an organization where the last guru who died, I've met him, very nice person. So when he died, my friend who's an ardent follower, they have like ashramas in Rishikesh and all of that. So he was actually, she explained because she had gone to witness it. He was put into the river after his death. He was tied.
Oh.
Yeah. But that is the way you deal with sages, according to texts.
Oh.
Okay. So the river released his bonds and left him ashore unhurt. The river came to be known as Vipasha, or the liberator of bonds. Now, what is Vipasha? The river Bias. So Vipasha. No, Vipasha. Satluj is Satadri.
Okay.
I'm talking about the third line. The river came to be known as Vipasha, or the liberator of bonds, which is the river Bias. And of course, Bias is named after Vyas, who wrote the Mahabharata, and Vyas Kund, where the river Bias originates. But that is later. Bias river came to be known later. But the early name of this river was Vipasha. And Vipasha literally means liberator of bonds. What bonds? The bonds that Vashisht was tied with. Now, another story is Sage Vashisht threw himself into the Satluj river. But the river divided itself into 100 shallow channels and left the sage on dry land. The river became known as Satadri, or the 100-channeled.
Okay.
Okay. So you have the Satluj River Valley, the Bias Valley. Now, the Bias at some point does join the Satluj.
Yeah, they're all part of the Indus system.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Now, I want to show you a video that my students made. But before I do that, this you won't find anywhere. And this is a very interesting thing. So for a whole month, my students researched on, now what happens is, we know that this part, especially in the Western Himalayas, was worshipped by Shiva and Shakti. Now, of course, these epics have been in circulation, but also sometimes, we get bored of things. You have to keep reviving old traditions to make sure they are in circulation. So the Bhakti movement started in the 16th century, 16th, 17th century. All over India, you find Meera, you find, Tulsidas and all of those people who kind of brought the bhakti, the sense of bhakti back into that Indian consciousness. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we have a lot of people like that. Now, in this area, Ram was not worshipped earlier. Especially Mahabharata is more, this thing. And when I talk about the Mahabharata, there are very interesting facts there. Now, with the Ramayana, what happened is there was a change, there was a shift. The shift was, we see that the Rajas of the Kullu Valley, especially in the Western Himalayas, the Siddh Raja, the Pals had come from the eastern part of India and they settled here. They conquered these areas. The first ruler was Siddhpal. They were all worshippers of Shiva. Sometime during Jagat Singh's time in the 16th, 17th century, they started worshipping Vishnu. So much so that the temples were converted, Shiva temples were converted into Vishnu temples. The stories were put together where, this whole sectarian kind of sect kind of conflict was always there, which is more supreme, the Lingayats, like you have the Lingayats and all, the Vaishnavites and all. So it seems, and you'll see this in the documentary, there is, and I'm not going to tell the myth, but because of the myth, the whole idea of the Ramayana takes root in the Himalayas. Because of a myth that is put in by the ruler in Kullu, to set the stage for the Dussehra festival. The Dussehra of the Kullu Valley is one of the best in the world.
Really? Oh.
Yes. Yeah. People from all over the world come to see the Dussehra festival.
I see.
It is that famous. Yeah.
Okay. And so that was established by a Kullu king?
Yeah, by the Kullu king.
Planted a myth.
Yeah. So I'm going to show you that video. It's an 11-12 minute video, and then I'll have a discussion after that. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Ready?
Yeah.
Who is Puhari Baba, the cave-dwelling sage? Sometimes called Peohari, Furi, Pauhari, or Pahari Baba. He is elusive as he is intriguing. We set out to find something of the many Puhari Babas. We've been told he is between 140 and 1,000 years old, wandering through the Nagar forest and all white. Some say he has 9 toes and 9 fingers. His cave stretches from Nagar to Parbati Valley, and maybe he's still hidden somewhere therein. We've been told he only appears to those he wishes to see, but the best place to find him is in the water.
वो तो संत थे, अब उनके ड्रेस अब का
I think it was
उसका
the
संती
same.
रंग हो सकता था, कोई भी
It
कलर।
could have been orange or white. It just was his preference.
And he was like treated like guru by the kings of Kullu, spiritual advisor for them.
क्योंकि उनको पास शक्ति ऐसी थी ना।
He was Falahari. He used to eat only fruits.
फिर यहाँ गांव को लोग दूध लेता था कृष्ण भगवान को, फिर उसने वो दूध मांगना मांगा, बाबा ने दूध मांगना, फिर ऊपर को दूध कम होने लगा, फिर ऊपर पुजारी लोगों ने बोला भाई दूध क्यों कम हो रहा है, बोला भाई नीचे बाबा बैठा हुआ वो मांगता है दूध, तो बाबा लोगों ने हमें देना पड़ेगा।
नहीं उनके होते नहीं थे, बहुत पहले की बात है, आई थिंक 1000 years old।
ये नहीं जाता कहीं, ना ये जाता ना कृष्ण जाता, ये अपने स्थान में बैठा हुआ था ना, इन्हें के पास आता है दूध चलने वगैरह के लिए।
This area was predominant that time by Shaivas and Shaktakas. So this guy, he came, he started actually the Vaishnavism here. He was the first guy to introduce Vaishnavism in Kullu. People, they tell that some priests from Tipri, it's a valley in Parvati Valley. So Pandits from that area, they used to know how to extract silver from the ore. So they had these formulas. So somebody made some complaints against them to the Raja that they are cheating you or something like that. So Raja had did something wrong to them and they cursed Raja. Like for 4 or 5 generations before dying, they used to get these symptoms of leprosy. So to get rid from this leprosy and to cure this leprosy, the Baba had told that you should start taking the Charnamritam. They came to the Fuariji, the Fuari Baba, the Falahari Baba, the Krishna Das Baba. So this Baba, he told that nobody, no any temple or any puja in this valley of any god will help you. You better get the idol of Rama from Ayodhya. So these statues, then they managed some group of Pandits. They went from here to Ayodhya. They stayed for a long period there.
That's the king.
And one day just stolen these statues and brought up to the Kullu Valley. So that's how the Raja Jagat Singh has brought. And from since that day, they are worshipping Rama.
इदं दुर्वापुरं श्रीरामाय साङ्गाय सपरिवाराय अयुद्धाय समानाय शक्तिकाय नमः समर्पयामि। ओम श्रीरामकृष्णाय केशवप्रिय करोमि श्रीरामाय साङ्गाय सपरिवाराय अयुद्धाय समानाय शक्तिकाय नमः समर्पयामि।
So they attribute him to bringing Vaishnavism.
So once upon a time, and the time we're speaking of is early 16th century in Rajasthan, Galtak, which is where, of course, the Nath yogis headed by Taranat resided. The king at the time was named Prithviraj, and he was a disciple of Taranat. And he would go to see him and take his darshan every day. So Payahari shows up there and just sets up his sacred fire, his dhuni, and starts meditating there. And so eventually some of the Nath yogis notice him and they come and they say, what are you doing here? This is our turf, basically. You need to get out of here. According to the story, then Taranat comes out and takes the form of a ferocious tiger in order to scare away Krishnadas Payahari. And Paihari is unperturbed, but the tiger keeps growling ferociously and inching closer and closer. He actually gives pieces of his own flesh from his leg to the tiger repeatedly several different times. But the tiger seems unsatisfied and keeps coming towards Paihari. And finally, Paihari basically says, "You're such a jackass." And immediately, Taranat turns from a tiger into a jackass, a donkey. Taranat himself is very deferential, and tells the king, this Krishnadas Paihari is more powerful than I am. You should become his disciple. And he agrees to provide Paihari and his community with firewood and to leave the area. In terms of myth versus history, it's obviously really hard to parse these things out.
Puhari Baba's legacy has been packaged into a narrative that he matters because he brought Vaishnavism to Kulu. Yet in our time in the valley, we haven't seen a reality that matches this mythology.
There is not really Vaishnavism in this valley right now. Like there will be 0.01% people, those who are Vaishnava, but
बाबा लोग कहाँ जाएगा, वापस हो जाएंगे।
Instead, we are left with a collection of spaces founded off the influence of one man. Despite how little he is known today, Puhari Baba's memory is central to the story of Vaishnavite temples across the valley. In short, Vaishnavism did not need to win over Shaivism, and Puhari Baba need not be a household name for his story to have a tangible impact on the Kulu Valley.
ऐसे लोग दिए भी लोग आएंगे ना नहाने के लिए, ऊपर पानी घर को लेना, गुजारिश से मांगना, यहाँ से पानी बोतल में डाल के घर। ये नहीं है, ये आंबर है, इसकी कोई मूर्ति नहीं है। ये आंबर है सादा, चलता फिरता बाबा बना है। ये बाबा के ठोंड में चलता आता जाता है, शाम को यहाँ बिस्तर बना के रखते हैं, बिस्तर में सो जाता है, कब जाना हो।
These stories obviously simplify like decades and often even centuries of historical change. They simplify them into sort of a nice, neat moment. That's what they tend to do.
They're being living here. We are hearing this from ancestors. There are not any written evidences.
We found many answers in the water, but the people hold the stories and the many tales left to be told.
आतवाली बेटी रकमली आतवाली बेटी रकमली दूजा नाम मत दई जोरा हमारी रे जोड़ी यारा यारी रे जोड़ी यारा ओ येल पड़ी ता लावे चोरो येल पड़ी ता लावे चोरो डोटा के येर मारे रात हमारी रे जोड़ी यारा यारी रे जोड़ी यारा ओ थारी मारी जोड़ी रकमली थारी रे मारी जोड़ी रकमली दूजा नाम मत दई जोरा हमारी रे जोड़ी यारा जय तारी रे जोड़ी यारा
Yeah.
Very
how-
nice place. Where is that?
what? Where is what?
Where is that place? The temple? It's very pretty.
It's very near to where I am. So this is what I do, Sushila, with my field schools. I have lots of films like that where so I kind of tell my students, I give them a research topic. And then I tell them to do qualitative and quantitative research, try to, ask these questions. So one of the questions that how did Vaishnavism come and why are we seeing a Shiva temple? And follow those trajectories. And I told them about the Raghunath temple and so one of the ruler was also, and there's so many interviews like that, and I tell them to kind of make a short film on it so that others can be enlightened also, because not everybody is going to read a paper.
True.
So I tell them to write a paper, and I tell them this is a part of the in 1 month they have to make a 10-minute documentary.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nicely done also.
Huh? Yeah. And other ones are also very well done. So I'll during this course, I will show all of them because I feel this is such a wonderful way of sharing their work. And then end of the field school, I go to Nagar Castle and I organize tea and I get all the locals and I put it on the projector and we have such a lovely evening. And even the locals are amazed at some stories that they never heard of, and how, when you would pick them, they really understand the depth of something. So it's very gratifying to see this actually. Yeah. Yeah. So you see how they explain that because of Puhari Baba, the legend, and there's a cave there and there's this temple, nobody stays there, they're just sitting there. Some person will come and it's such a calm place. Like when you come, I'll take you there. It's such a calm place. You just sit there, you in the Deodar forest, and you look at all that urbanization happening down below in the valley. And you feel, oh my God, they wanted peace and look at what we've done,
Yeah.
So it's really, really very, you get attuned in a very different kind of way. And when you talk to people, you learn about the legends, and these stories are not written anywhere. So it's very important that we document them. So, the legend of Puhari Baba, they just hear it. Okay. So now they can see it also, that kind of a thing. So yeah, so that's the kind of thing I love doing, just having students come in, involve them in a larger research project. And they handle bits and pieces where they also learn, and it enhances the quality of the project also. Yeah. So from here, now we know that Vaishnavism comes, and now the king has to make sure that the gods and goddesses of the Kullu Valley, who are the local gods, and when I talk about the local gods and the mainstream gods and iconography, like we'll be doing a lot of that. So he invites them to celebrate Dussehra, victory of good over evil, because now he is the protector of the Raghunath, of the statue, and the king also has recently like changed his surname from Pal to Singh. Okay, so identifying with the mainstream Rajput kind of clan, and calls himself Raghuvamshi, comes from the clan of Raghu. Okay, and inviting for Dussehra on a common ground in rathas. Rathas, earlier it was just basket, but now the whole idea of a visual procession, taxation, subservience is being carried out with the festival of Dussehra. The king leads the procession with Raghunath's thing. Then a goddess, Hidimba, who's associated with the Mahabharata and the Asuras, she comes together. These two gods are very important for the Dussehra festival. And there's a congregation of all the gods and goddesses on the common ground in Kullu. And earlier taxes used to be where money used to be paid. So all of this is orchestrated for economics.
Okay.
Okay. So it's very interesting. And when we talk about the Dussehra festival in detail, they are like little kingdoms. They're little kingdoms where the deity is the the ruler.
Okay.
And then how to bring all these little rulers under their domain, you create a festival. And it's still going on. In fact, during the pandemic, when they were not allowed to come, the gods and goddesses were so upset. And when I say they're so gods and goddesses in the Kulu Valley are very humanized. Okay, they are just like living beings.
Yeah.
So you enjoyed this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very interesting.
Okay, so the Mahabharata talks about the Ganga as well. The word Himalaya, Sanskrit for abode of snow, features regularly in the poem. There are other names also: Shivalay, the abode of Shiva; Himachal, or mountains of snow; Himavant, the mountain king who was father of Ganga. Now, Ganga is a moving and flowing axis mundi. If you remember when I was talking about natural archetypes and spatial archetypes, this whole thing of having that axis mundi where the two realms are meeting of the realms. Okay, so Ganga is a moving and flowing meeting of the realms. That's why this whole fixation with us Indians, Hindus, with taking a dip in the water. Okay, there's something very therapeutic about it, because it kind of encodes. It is a way of making us speak with our ancestors. It makes us feel very comforted. So we know that Indo-Aryan culture gets rooted around the Ganges, the Ganga Yamuna Dwab. This is the time when we find an expansion of culture with the coming of the Iron Age. Why is the Mahabharata so popular? They're using iron in it, destroying weapons. Okay. Why do we find a preponderance of the Mahabharata characters in Himalayas? Is because now these areas can be taken over. Forests can be cut because of iron. Okay. The Ganges so finds its root source in the Himalayas, and it's drawn inside the narrative of Hinduism's expanding culture. Ganga is called Bhagirathi on the start of a 2,500 kilometer journey, after whom the river is named Bhagirath. He prayed for 1,000 years for its waters to flow in order to expiate the sins of 60,000 relatives who had perished under the curse of a great sage that they had wrongly accused. So he got into penance. Ganga remained in the heavens at the center of the universe, unwilling to leave. Shiva only had the power to make her go. So Bhagirath followed the command of Brahma to pray for 1 more year, living on air. Ganga was then forced from the heaven, rushing to earth on her jata, on the matted dreadlocks of Shiva's head, bringing life-giving waters to the plains, the Ganga Yamuna Dwab. So ritual bathing in the sacred waters, personification of life-giving waters in myths and iconography are very well known. The maternal and procreative aspects of the river Ganga and Yamuna. They guard doorways in temples. They're standing, Ganga is on the crocodile and Yamuna is on the tortoise. So the whole idea is, one, that the rulers are from the plains. So in the Gujar Pratihara tradition of temple building, you find Ganga and Yamuna always flanking the doorways. So the door jams. So they come from a tradition that, okay, we belong from the plains. Okay, so these two rivers are important for us. Even Ganga and Yamuna, for example, do not flow in the Western Himalayas, but they're still important because the rulers brought her there. So one aspect is our domain, our kingdom is that big. The other is that you enter the temple being purified. Okay, so also the pot that we worship, always in rituals you'll find the pot. It signifies birth and death, and it is a significant element. The water purification is a very significant element in Hindu traditions. Okay. So let me see if there's, yeah. So this is it basically. Wait, I'll stop sharing. And in our next session, I'll go on to the Mahabharata. So I've discussed the Ramayana. You've seen how in the Bhakti movement, the Ramayana comes in. In the Mahabharata, it is more popular, okay? With the, you've heard of the Pandav Leela and all in the Himalayas, Central Himalayas, even the Western Himalayas have a lot of traditions. So I'll be talking a lot about how Mahabharata, and that is like my work, how we see the epics and sacred texts manifesting in daily life, rituals and festivals. So I'll be talking a lot about that. I'll start off with the mentioning of the Mahabharata, the illustrations and all, and then go over to these traditions as we see them today. Yeah.
That will also be very interesting.
Yeah.
But you didn't mention one thing. Ravana is supposed to have done penance near Mount Kailash. I don't know if that's part of the Ramayana per se, but Ravana is supposed to have done great penance. And
because he was a big Shiva Bhakt, na?
But he is supposed to have done it there, and there is a lake next to Manasarovar. There's another lake.
Yeah, the Rakshas lake. Yeah, I didn't mention it.
That's named after.
Yeah, good. You pointed it out. I'll add that. I didn't mention, but there's so many different variations of the stories.
Right.
Yeah. So whatever I could lay hands on, I did that. But good that I'll make a note of it so I can add it.
I'll send you a picture of Rakshasthal.
Please, you've been there?
Yes. I have obsessively traveled the Himalayas. So.
You've been to Kailash Mansarovar also?
Yeah.
How was it? How was the experience?
The experience is actually, I don't know how to put it. See, much of it happens in luxury, but till you get to Tibet, you can go by flight, you can go by vehicle, whatever, and till you get to the point. Then when you do the parikrama, that's when the difficulty gets you, because you're starting at 15,000 feet at Manasarovar.
So you did the entire Kora?
No, we didn't do it because somebody got ill and we had to come back.
Oh, that's always a problem, no?
Because 15,000 feet. And the Chinese very often stop you from completing the Kora because they say there is snow. At one point, you have to cross 18,000 feet, 18,500 feet, Dolmala. And so they don't let you go any further. They send you back. So you may land up not doing it anyway.
So Sheila, you should give a talk on the Institute Forum about your journey. It'll be wonderful to for you to talk about your experiences as a person who loves the Himalayas and who has, would you like to?
Yeah, sure. Sometime let me get a theme in place.
Yeah.
And I can engage with my pictures. I have a lot of pictures.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. We would love to listen to you. And the forum is all about that. But tell me, so Sheila, are you enjoying, because we've crossed the 1 month mark, are you enjoying the course and you feel you're having fun?
Yes.
Okay.
It's fine.
Okay. Yeah, but do give me like suggestions also, because we've crossed the 1 month mark, that if you want me to add certain things or you want me to change certain ways, I do it. So it helps me also.
Yeah, I've forgotten what exactly is in store, but I'll just go through it and I'll.
Okay.
Whenever.
Yeah, because I do know that I have that archaeology part, because I've discussed about it so much. I'm going to skip that because I've talked about archaeology, numismatics. So I'm going to talk about, of course, archaeology, numismatics in context of the Himalayas in the coming lectures. But now it will all be Himalayan centric. Because for the past 3.5 weeks, we've totally focused on texts and, just understanding that whole corpus. Because
Right. I get that you're laying the foundation for the next.
yeah, because that was also very important. If you don't understand all of that, that when I say, oh, it's from the Puranas, but if you don't know what the Puranas are, or you know, even if you know, it has to be fixated in your mind. So I feel that's very important.
So maybe a little more on the environment, the geology, like Siddharth.
Yeah. No, that is a whole week. Remember, it's on geography
Right.
where I'll talk about geology. I'll talk about tectonics, geology, everything. That's a whole week. Yeah, I
Sure.
think it's coming up after I finish the epics.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and these epics are important because wherever you go in the Himalayas, you have a story about.
Yeah, that's the Pandavas made it at night. That is one story.
Yeah.
And they say it with such conviction. वो तो Pandava
I made a stupid statement to somebody saying, you know, take all this with a pinch of salt. So he got into a major rant. So I decided to keep quiet. I said, no. I mean,
you know, there is this Sundar Gayatri temple, okay, in Jagat Sukh, which is the first capital of the Kulu kings. And there, the Sundar Gayatri, you know, Gayatri, Savitri, it's they worshipped early Vedic goddess, right? So I said, oh, who built the temple? He says, you don't know? I said, no. He says, but you're an archaeologist, you don't know? They were like questioning my knowledge and my degree, suspecting it. They said,
you should know everything about everything.
Yeah, they said, yeah, even if it's like a different culture, okay? So say Pandavas, how could you not know this? And I'm like thinking, this is an early Vedic goddess. The Pandava made it. The Mahabharata, okay, it comes much after the Vedic texts, right? So this whole idea of the Pandavas taking over everything, the Mahabharata taking over everything is a very dominant theme in the central and the western Himalayas.
Yeah.
So much so, and this is something to, because I'll be talking about this is next class, the use of iron.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Iron Age. The Mahabharata is an Iron Age culture. So you see iron being used, and even today in the old temples, you find the use of iron so it's so dominant, the use of iron in their rituals, that you actually see it everywhere, and you start noticing it only after you kind of understand the Iron Age. Like you start noticing all these things more. Like
you mean whatever they use, their vessels and the spatula, whatever.
Yes, iron. And so Sheila, now when you go to the mountains, next journey, you will be amazed at what all you notice, because I really feel that when you start engaging with something at a deeper level, you start noticing things that you may have never noticed before. It's happened with me also. For me, it's a learning experience, because I was not trained as a Himalayan archaeologist. I've learned it, being there, so studying and all that. But it's such a fascinating journey to me. I just love preparing my lectures for you guys and meeting you, because it's so, I don't know, it just gives such a good kind of vibe. With all the
you kind of got into a groove, because I've been following your lectures and everything for almost a year now. I think you really got into a groove.
No, and I'm so grateful. You have done other courses with me, so Sheila, it means a lot to me.
Yeah. No, it's a trigger of my interest also. I mean, I've always been interested in the Himalayas, but this has kind of given me a little bit of focus.
Yeah, and I do want to draw you into the journal thing that I'm planning to publish in January, February. So, we'll talk about that also. It's just that I have had so many things to do, and I'm just like one person, taking care of my mother, my son, staff. You can't even imagine the nitty-gritties I have to deal with every day. I've got 5 people in Kulu who take care of everything. And
there was somebody else with Ekta.
Oh, Ekta is another story. I'm very disappointed actually in her.
If you don't want to talk about it, it's fine.
No, it's okay. I just felt she was very unprofessional. She went on a holiday, and I'll just